whether in religious ceremonies or celebration of everyday life, music is an integral part of the life of the Black Hebrews.
It's part of our life, most definitely. It's one of the most important things of our life, because that is what carried us through history. When we were taken into slavery, it was forbidden for us to speak our own language, to do anything regarding our culture. So the songs kept us connected. We would sing about the Jordan River because this is where we came from.
Black Hebrews are Afro-Americans who claim to have descended directly from Abraham. In the 1960s, Ben Carter, a worker from Chicago, called for a return of the community to the Holy Land. Hundreds followed him to Liberia and then to Israel. Among these pioneers was bass player Charles Blackwell, alias Prince Hezekiah. He quickly established the Soul Messengers to fulfill the basic needs of the community.
We practiced and we got real good with the Israeli song, and so our first performance was a big hit because they wasn't expecting all of these black faces to know Hebrew. And it was a shock, and we immediately became famous.
Nevertheless, at first, those who presented themselves as the only real descendants of the chosen people received an icy welcome in Israel. Black Hebrews are refused Israeli citizenship and have no legal status.
When I arrived, it was we were very isolated, and it wasn't warm. We weren't accepted. Like most people wanted to know, why are you here? Why you come here? You know, they didn't understand, and we just told them we came here to live in Israel. We wanted to represent and support Israel. And slowly but surely, as we began to move around the country and sing, my portion was singing, the community and the whole country began to warm up to us.
The choir was managed by Elisheva, and the Soul Messengers quickly achieved international success. In Israel, they are invited to play at official events, and the members of the community took part in primetime TV shows. In 2006, a Black Hebrew was chosen to represent Israel in the Eurovision Song Contest.
Of course, this is a major event. It's a big victory for the community. Again, all these things that brings us out front and show the community, the large community, what it is that we can do. It's a great victory for us here.
Today, the community numbers 3,000 members, mostly settled in the Village of Peace in the southern city of Dimona. The children of the community received Israeli nationality and serve in the armed forces. The music remains and continues to give rhythm to their lives.
Shalom Bahasham Yahawashi Yisrael. This is the tribal minister, Prince Charlandine Ben Ami Mortazarian Ben Yasha Allah Senior. I give all praise and honor to Yahweh, the supreme, intelligent, powerful one of my forefathers, Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, those striving for righteousness' sake all over the planet Earth. I say unto the family, Shabbat Shalom. We're going to get into, this is being beyond anti-Semitism. This is about who Israel is and the rise of the real Israel. Let's get into it. Hallelujah. Hebrew Israelite sovereign nationalism rising worldwide. There's no history waiting for us like some giant. Let me stop this and read this. There is no history waiting for us like some giant and architecturally perfect edifice that we will, at long last, discover the tangled growth of an intellectual forest. History does not exist for us until and unless we dig it up, interpret it, and put it together. Frederick W. Turner III. Hebrew Israelite sovereign nationalism rising worldwide. This is lovely dedicated to the Holy Father, His Excellency, Dr. Prince Nasik Shaliach bin Yahuda, the original dean of the School of the Prophets Institute at Jerusalem. The people of the book. Hallelujah. Shalom, Princess Christina. It's good to see you, Princess.
Dateline, Dimona. Recently, an awesome event occurred in a little town in southern Judea, Israel, currently known by few. The event reconnected the African-American freedom struggle of the 1960s and 70s to its biblical roots, a struggle which had been derailed, rendering them incapable of producing offspring called by the name of Yah. Yet what could the event possibly be that it would be so important as to expand upon the significance of the Civil Rights era, one of the landmark episodes of the entire 20th century? On February 27th,
Shabbat Shalom, sister.
2005 in Dimona, Israel, an executive delegation of the SCLC, led by its president, the Honorable Charles Steele, joined the Hebrew Israelite community and various dignitaries in dedicating the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Southern Christian Leadership Conference Ben Ami Institute for a New Humanity, an institution dedicated to the eradication of violence in all forms. Yet, before we can begin to talk about that institution and those events, we must first acknowledge the historical events and contributing forces that made the landmark event possible. We begin by informing you that a monumental and awesome crime has been committed and a cover-up set in motion to protect the guilty perpetrators and their benefits.
Somebody asked me, am I a part of them? Cain, absolutely. My Saba, my grandfather is Prince Asiel ben Israel, the one who actually found the community with Ben Ami. The three leaders was in fact Ben Ami, my grandfather Prince Asiel ben Israel, and Dr. Shaliach ben Yahuda, the original dean of the School of the Prophets Institute. So what I'm showing, I'm going to show some clippings to prove that this is beyond Deshaun Jackson. This is beyond Steven Jackson. This is beyond Grandmaster Jay. This is beyond, Ice Cube. This is beyond Nick Cannon. All this that's going on, this anti-Semitism thing, this thing been brewing up for years. We are in the process now of resurrecting all over the planet Earth by the way of Hebrew Israelite sovereign nationalism. I told y'all, the mighty Hebrew been telling all this for years. For years. Now y'all going to see, because quiet is kept. When it comes to social media, I was the first to reveal the community on an international level in the sense of passing it through the black conscious community, spreading it all throughout this country in the sense of pushing it hard body. You know what I'm saying? And now, here we are in 2020, 30 years later. It's all over the world. This is beyond religious ritualism. This is strictly about Torah being the constitutional blueprint that will develop in the minds of the children of Israel, Hebrew Israelite sovereign nationalism. Now, I'm going to show y'all first Beyond the Mountaintop, the Village of Peace, part 1, 2, and 3. Then after I show y'all that, then I'm going to show you the Village of Peace that Ben Ami was manifesting, which is going to give you an understanding why they had to first, because remember, they first criminalized to the world media the kingdom through certain antics that they said Whitney Houston was doing, that she was crazy, she was high, what is she doing over there? The slander, you know, the constant trying to put us in a web, a One West camp web, putting us under Project Megiddo, and then later on the FBI apologizes to, you know, us and take us from off that list. Originally we was on that list. Ben Ami, all of them. You know what I mean? All of us that was under the teachings of the kingdom of Yah. By the way, the original Hebrew Israelite nation, aka also known as the African Hebrew Israelites of Jerusalem. Okay? Dudes don't really know the dynamics of what's going on. Then after I show that, then I'm going to show Dr. Shaliach. And then I'm going to end it with the master teacher. You know what I mean? Ben Ami and Prince Asiel. Watch. Check it. Just listen, y'all.
Factors. The magnitude of the crime is so profound that it changed the destiny of hundreds of millions of African men, women, and children, and the entire fate of a continent. The diabolical perpetrators took great pains to carefully destroy evidence.
Now understand, y'all know we did this video. Y'all mean the Kingdom of Yah, the community I'm a part of, did this video. So we have to use language that people can relate to. When we say the Africans, yes, and no, we are Africans. Now that might sound oxymoronic, but it's not. Geopolitically, yes, so-called Negroes are African Americans. On the so-called African Americans are African based on the geopolitical stance, but ethnically, no. We are Israelites. We are Hebrew Israelites. That is not our nationality. There's no such nationality as an African. But geopolitically, can we identify as Africa? Yeah, because we know that Israel is in northeastern Africa, period. We know that it's originally not called Africa. We know that you have the Garden of Eden, and Eden itself being the whole planet Earth. The garden was east of Lemuria. Different story, different topic. But watch how you see this play. You're going to see that there was an international global conspiracy to stop us from rising as being Yisrael. That's why you never seen them come up against us if we said we were Democrats, Republicans, Reforms, Socialists, Communists, Atheists, Egyptians, gods, earths, goddesses. They never said nothing to us. But when we said we were Yisrael, Yasha'Allah, man, held and open wide up. Watch, y'all, watch.
Provide themselves with an alibi and even create and plant false evidence to conceal their diabolical acts.
To conceal their diabolical acts. This is a conspiracy, man. This is a freaking conspiracy to cut us off from being a nation, man. I'm telling you, what they did to Nick Cannon was an example to show the rest of them celebrity Negroes not to step out of line. Because the day that you step out of line, for your body is going to be lined up with the white chalk. You get what I'm saying when you're dealing with these type of people that's in power. Watch.
Presentation will carefully reconstruct the elements of the crime to grant you the opportunity to consider the evidence for yourself.
Right.
The evidence will be extracted from commonly accepted.
So what we doing is we're playing the district attorney right now. And we're using the world and the nations at large as the jury. And we are imposing charges against this Western Democratic harlot. That's what we're doing. Showing to the world who Yisrael is and who they not. Now, all y'all that been lying, saying that y'all Israel and y'all not, after y'all finish watching this presentation here, I want y'all to tag everybody. after y'all finish watching this presentation, I want y'all to show and prove which other people on this planet went through this in such a chronological order without interruption. We talking facts. We talking emet, imoth, truth, which is the inherent power to produce the promised effects. That is what Ben Ami left us with. Watch.
Sources of historical, academic, and theological data, including the Bible, the most owned and read book in history. As we begin, let us consider the basic elements of a crime.
The element of a crime. Let's go back. Because what did I say? Look, what did I say? We playing the district attorney. And we're consummating charges against this Western harlot, Euro-democratic system that we're in. And we're saying to the earth that there were crimes against the human family of nations that have been over here denationalized. This is why I developed the World National Habeas Corpus. The reason why when Farrakhan, or let's start with the most honorable Malcolm X, went to the UN and said that there were 4 million Negroes, 20 million Negroes were being persecuted in the United States. They turned this ass around. In 1993, the most honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan went to the UN and said there were 40 million so-called African Americans getting persecuted in the United States. They turned him around. We are now consummating charges saying that you have over 45 million Hebrew Israelite sovereign nationals in the land of the great captivity, meaning in the wilderness of the United States, and not to mention many more millions of them that are scattered throughout the rest of South America, Central America, and the Caribbean islands, and all over the planet Earth. But the central focus is going to be the so-called Negro that came straight from the continent to Jamestown, Virginia, 1619. Yehowadah, Judah. This is why after August 19th, 2019, hell been on our fucking asses. We are in post-judgment. This is post-judgment Israel. Now, Yahweh. Sof or Ayin Sof. What he's doing now is fulfilling Yeshaya or Yeshayahu, chapter 11, verse 11 to 12. Now Israel gonna rise all over the planet Earth. Right? Zechariah chapter 12, verse 7. The tents of Judah would be first. Isn't this the community that I come out of? We said we were from the tribe of Judah. When we came up in there and established the prophetic Daniel 2:44 kingdom of Yahweh. Let's get it. We were the forerunners. Now, y'all's about to rain fire on this planet. Let's get it. Hebrew Israelite sovereign nationalism rising worldwide.
Now let us ponder for a moment what the result would be if any one or all of the elements of a crime or trial was tampered with, deleted, or destroyed. The trial process itself would be irreparably damaged, and the guilty would remain free, even if their guilt was widely suspected or even widely known. Thus, in its truest sense, the perfect crime is the crime that has yet to be discovered. Therefore, never brought to trial, nor judged, nor ever punished. For the purposes of our presentation, we assert that the great international religious conspiracy committed against the sons and daughters of the prophets, Israel, is the greatest crime perpetrated against a people in all recorded history. But why should Israel be so significant? Or maybe we can ask if, in fact, Israel really is that significant. Israel, whose name literally means
Shalom,
one having
Zosa.
power with the God of Israel,
El,
and
that's
was
my
man,
brother right
was
there.
chosen from
Shalom,
all the nations of the earth for a special purpose, to witness to the unity of God in the midst of universal idolatry, to illustrate to the nations the blessedness of serving the one true God, Yah Kadosh Yisrael, to receive, preserve, and transmit the scriptures, and to be the human channel for the highway of the Messianic seed. History is the prophetic unfoldment of the word of Yah. Prophecy, which has been spoken aforetime and written in the winds of time, creating events, situations, and circumstances which affect nations, peoples, and things, determining their fate, destinies, struggles, and achievements. History is a guide, which if adhered to would prevent pitfalls and disasters. History can be falsified, distorted, and even lost. We must be careful to factor in that the historical record will not always reflect the actual events, circumstances, and people accurately or truthfully. Remember, the evidence tampering done by the perpetrators. Howbeit, as history relates to prophecy, and prophecy is the infallible word of Yah, then the evidence remains that whatever the circumstances, falsifications, distortions, etc., history is true. For no matter what man has attempted to do, all is in the divine will of Yah. For Yah has put it in the hearts of all men to fulfill his will, whatever it may be. As we delve into the historical record, let us be reminded that because this crime was unlike any other, the evidence we are seeking is also unique and will not be remotely similar to any other historical event. In other words, it will be impossible to confuse this historical event with any other historical event. In the world of sport, there generally exists in every game some form of disciplinary tool imposed upon the players and the participants for behavior outside the established rules of the game. Usually, when a single extreme offense or a series of offenses occur, that player is taken out of the game and prevented from playing for a specified period of time. A significant point regarding this type of punishment is that the game resumes and continues play without that penalized player and without much or any notice of his absence. In a similar scenario, the Israelites, whose degenerate behavior and desire to mimic the pagan nations surrounding them resulted in the ultimate penalty being imposed upon them by the Holy One of Israel. For our first piece of evidence, we reference Genesis, the 15th chapter and the 12th verse, which speaks of a very unique captivity. While the elect of God, the people of the book, sat mute and paralyzed, unable to make a positive move on their own behalf, the band played on, and the game continued without much if any notice of their absence in the midst of the family of the nations. In fact, referencing Psalms 83, a diabolical plot was hatched by the chosen instrument of their chastisement, the Euro-Gentile family of nations, to prevent the chosen people of God from ever getting back in the game. During this time, an entire world was formed and fashioned under the banner of European colonial domination, backed up by the constant threat of force. The principles upon which this world established itself are force, greed, pleasure, and selfishness. As we reflect on the pages of ancient or contemporary history, whenever we identify these principles at work, we must remember we are actually viewing a world. As for the Israelites, the elect of God, the chosen people of the book, they became identifiable by the dismal prognostications forecast in Deuteronomy 28, a condition which ultimately saw them transformed from the chosen people of God to the dry bones of Ezekiel's vision, so far down that getting up would never cross their minds. The seeds of soul transformation had been planted, taken firm root, and begun to produce a yield of strange fruit. Everything African decreased in value and influence, while all things European became the standard. This soul transformation would result in a particularly catastrophic scenario where all of the precious resources and the hard-fought toil and labor of their hands would forever escape their grasp, but also serve to establish their enemies as unrivaled economic, political, and military powers for generations to follow. The ultimate objective of this diabolical system of psychological manipulation, soul transformation, was profit at all costs and by any means. Undeniably, this objective was achieved to overwhelming results, exceeded and replicated over centuries and generations, even until this, the modern era, continuing to create a scenario where even in this day, precious resources of Africans and her descendants continue to be absorbed by foreigners generally represented by a European nation. As the culture of the European became more favored and spread through all lands, the seeds of permanent European domination were contained in their academic, theological, and political institutions, and the exploited victims of the system now identify more with European culture and values, largely forgetting their own original cultures. Soul transformation is accomplished by way of using the following techniques: habit, fear, brainwashing, destruction of images, and through an academic or education process. Gradually, as the African became more and more entangled in the web of European lifestyles, he reflected the negative personality of his master as well as his own inferiority complex. As we ponder the fate of the victims of this soul transformation, we are left to ask the question, could there possibly exist on the horizon any glimmer of hope? Or possibility to balance the scales and end the suffering, or was this mental slavery to prove a perpetually binding seal? Although soul transformation proved profoundly successful, the architects of the system worried and fretted that their captives might somehow discover the formula that would release the snare: knowledge of self. A formula laying dormant, ready to be activated, and contained in the words recorded by the ancient Hebrew prophets in a book whose ultimate meaning and purpose for the average reader, like the African himself, seemed to be shackled and chained. Critical clues had been left as pieces of the puzzle, pointing toward a destiny completely unfamiliar to the prisoners of war known as slaves, languishing in mental slavery in the Western Hemisphere and Euro-Gentile world. The words of the Hebrew prophets held the key. But why should the words of the prophet be so significant? What elements distinguish their writings from any other authoritative written material? Submerged within these questions is an even greater question: who or what is a prophet? For the purpose of this significant topic, we must not rely on myth or some supernatural explanation that would cause a prophet to seem alien to our everyday existence. For example, if the substance of freedom was ever to materialize, the message of freedom had to come first, in order to inform the people as to what time it was, so that they could make the necessary preparations. Simply stated, a person with vision, who knows the way, must point the people in the right direction. Let us remember the eternal prayer of the blind man, for someone who can see and knows where to go that will lead them in the right direction. As a historical precedent, let us consider the ancient Egyptian captivity of the Israelites. a time when Israelites found themselves under the yoke of oppression in a foreign land and began to cry out in sorrow and agony because of their burdens. Acknowledging the theological concept of dualism, we shift our investigation to the 1960s and the condition of the so-called Negro in America, who likewise found himself deep within the bowels of a prophetically mandated captivity. Their cries echoed unto heaven, and after 400 years, the God of Israel heard their cries and sent messengers to prepare them for the long journey back to our true culture, homeland, and God. Perhaps no voice rung out with the eloquence, the passion, and the sincerity of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Here we find the meditations of the great Prince Dr. Shaliach ben Yehuda, headmaster and dean of the School of the Prophets, in reference to this great man and Holy Spirit, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Born in the spirit of freedom, Martin Luther King marked a new birth of hope for the children of the prophets and resurrected human love which America has yet to instill in the hearts of her people. He dedicated his life to those who died and to those living for the salvation of the children of the prophets. The world will little note nor long remember what he said, but it will never forget what he did. The incarnation of this soul stood as an ensign, representing and demonstrating the divine love of more than 20 million of his kind, children of the prophets. Not since the coming of Yeshua has anyone demonstrated the same love to a sad and despairing world. From his work sprang forth many more freedom fighters amid the children of the prophets. Dr. King represented a last possible turning point for the corrupted soul of America to even try to change. The fact that the United States could fathom, prescribe, and orchestrate such a violent end for this legendary man of peace proves that the cancerous hatred and wickedness afflicting America was inoperable. The only hope for the victims of America and America itself would have to be a new beginning. Except for his 1963 I Have a Dream speech, perhaps no speech or statement made by Dr. King remains more prevalent in the minds of people than the ominous, premonitory, divinely inspired, and unscripted mountaintop speech given within 48 hours before his life would be snuffed out by an evil conspiracy activated against him, but more so activated against the children of the prophets, still languishing under spiritual captivity in America and the world. A review of historical events leading up to the speech and following it caused this speech to assume prophetic significance.
I've been to the mountaintop. Hallelujah. And you can see what our people went through, because Martin Luther King right there, man, he was only 39. Remember, Malcolm and Martin, they both died at the age of 39. You know what I'm saying? And it's sad, but when you grammatically put the numbers together, where there's 3 and 9, 12 for the 12 tribes of Yisrael. But that's a different story, a different topic. Let's continue on.
But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about
Once again, many are familiar with the words expressed by Dr. King in this speech, yet our spiritual investigation requires us to take an even closer look at the statements uttered by King and to focus specifically on certain biblical metaphors which he employed in the mountaintop speech. We are reminded once again of the necessity of certain words being spoken before certain events can take place or achieve their full significance. As we replay the melody of the mountaintop speech again in our minds, we extract the following terms in sequential order: mountaintop, promised land, and the coming of the Lord. Let's ponder these terms and their biblical and symbolic nature for a moment. Let us also factor that during the final phase of his work, Dr. King expanded his focus beyond civil rights in America for so-called Negroes to larger issues of international human rights and justice for oppressed people of the world. With this focus in mind, are we left to conclude that Dr. King's ultimate vision was greater access to material possessions such as houses and cars, greater social mobility, and better jobs? Somehow the ends do not seem to justify the means, nor to honor the message. When we are left to do the math, we can only conclude that maybe we made a bad deal.
May close. And don't let anybody make you think that God chose America as his divine messianic force to be a sort of policeman of the whole world. God has a way of standing before the nations with judgment, and it seems that I can hear God saying to America, "You're too arrogant. If you don't change your ways, I will rise up and break the backbone of your power.
Damn.
And I'll place it in the hands of a nation that doesn't even know my name. Be still and know that I'm God."
Whoa.
The diabolical plot activated against Dr. King was only part of a larger scheme crafted by the Federal Bureau of Investigations known as the Counterintelligence Program, or COINTELPRO. The purpose of COINTELPRO, to quote its architect and mastermind, J. Edgar Hoover, was to prevent the rise of a black messiah who could unify and electrify the militant black nationalist movement. Electrify the masses to do what and for whom?
So if we not the Israelites, right? Y'all here with the mighty Hebrew. So we not the Israelites. Why would J. Edgar Hoover create counterintelligence program to stop the rise of a black messiah who would electrify the nationalistic aims of black America? Why would he do this? Unless they knew that we were the Israelites. Come on, man.
Just as when the winds of change began to blow over the people in ancient Egypt and crafty counsel was taken to suppress that spirit, similar forces began to seek the same objective in America, modern-day Egypt. With Dr. King removed from consideration for the messianic charge, we can state with certainty that just as Moses was permitted to ascend to the mountaintop, see the promised land, but not to enter it, it was not Dr. King's prophetic destiny to be the one who would lead the children of the prophets back home to the promised land. Nonetheless, within approximately 1 month of Dr. King's mountaintop speech, the African Hebrew Israelites returned to their ancestral homeland, represented by Prince Hezekiah and His Excellency Ben-Ami, to scout the land and prepare for the great ingathering and the establishment of the long-awaited Kingdom of God. And what was to become of Dr. King's dream of the beloved community, where truth, justice, mercy, equity, joy, happiness, love, and peace could be found? Dr. King's dream and the civil rights struggle would give way and find even greater meaning and expression.
Y'all gotta really dig what's going on here. See, a lot of people talk trash about Dr. King, but they probably never even heard what we just showed y'all. They don't even understand the cryptic knowledge of what we're displaying right here. You got to understand the similitude and metaphors when you read in Tanakh and understand Dr. Martin Luther King. Just like Moshe, he was a man, he raised under Pharaoh geopolitically. Dr. Martin Luther King, he raised, right, geopolitically in this American institution, right? As King was inside the scripture, seeing the face of Yah through the scripture, the same with Moses. So just as King developed to say his last speech in 1968 before he got assassinated, and then we went right into the land in 1969 because we left in 67, right? And went to 20 miles outside of Monrovia, Liberia. And then right in 1969, you seen us going into Israel right after the speech of Martin Luther King. So it's the same with Moses. He even had to learn the law as he was developing out of Egyptian thought, out of the American thought. Watch. This is why I'm saying it's deeper than anti-Semitism. This shit is deep. They're really trying to stop the rise of so-called Negroes from regaining their heritage as Israel. Watch this, y'all. Watch this.
And the long-awaited kingdom of Yah on earth, a government of men and women governed by the Holy One of Israel. For biblical support of this prophetic event, we submit for the record the inspired word of the prophets recorded in the book of 2 Chronicles and the book of the prophet Daniel. If my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. For as much as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it brake in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter. And the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof sure. With the death of Dr. King setting off riots in the urban centers of America, the African in America entered into a new era, post-civil rights. Better jobs, greater social mobility, and access to material gains had become available to be had. Yet the social and economic conditions of the communities declined even beyond the state of the so-called ghettos of the 1960s. Even in corporate America and the upwardly mobile sectors of Black America, the frustrations and anger resulted in a syndrome which became known as the rage of successful blacks. Thus we see the prophecies of Deuteronomy 28 still holding sway over our people languishing into captivity. The riots would create the smokescreen protecting the escape of the Israelites from America to contend with Yah Kadosh Yisrael face to face in the jungles of Liberia. With the Exodus of 1967, the Israelites had turned the page from the prophecies of Deuteronomy 28 over to Deuteronomy 30, where they would be regathered to their homeland and judgment would commence on their tormentors, the Euro-Gentile world system. For the house of Israel, this prophetic shift began the era known as post-judgment. Before them now lay the blessed opportunity to make the crucial choice, literally a life or death proposition, to choose between the death style they had known in the captivity or to create a new and better lifestyle in service to Yah and to humanity. To make these statements without a proper and orderly presentation of the information provided to us from historical and prophetic resources would be irresponsible, and it would seem outlandish and far-fetched. But with this information, we now gain the foundation to go back and analyze the religious terminology referenced by Dr. King earlier. Let's begin with the mountaintop. If interpreted literally, of course it would not provide us with a full understanding of what the prophets meant. For a more in-depth explanation, let's reference the book of Isaiah. A mountain in scriptural symbolism means a kingdom, authority, or rule. Thus we find the prophets using the symbol of a mountain to express an authority or a government that was specifically to come at the end of Euro-Gentile world dominion. Turning our attention to the stone, cut without hands. Once again we must reference Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon's dream, and the prophet Daniel's interpretation of that dream. Before this mountain could come into existence for people to travel there to be taught, there first had to be this stone, representing a government or kingdom of smaller proportions and scope. According to the Schofield Study Bible, this stone must not be identified with the church as some may hold, for the task of the church is never said to be the destruction of the nations of the earth. Furthermore, we emphasize that it would be historically out of context to connect this stone with religious church institutions per se, because no such institutions had come into existence during the time of the prophets. Prophetically speaking, there would come a time, or a dispensation, known as the church age. This particular age would serve as the sixth station toward a complete cycle of 7 dispensations. It was prophesied that the dispensation of the church age would ultimately end with the events taking place during the last days of the Euro-Gentile anti-Yah dominion. The close of the church age would give way to the final dispensation and chapter of the prophetic unfoldment of the plan of Yah, the kingdom age. The church corporately is not in the vision of the Old Testament prophet. The final restoration of Israel is secured in the kingdom, and the source of blessing in the kingdom is the king, who is not only David's son, but also Emmanuel. Here we must call to your attention that the prophets came with a message specifically for the house of Israel. We see here that the kingdom age would once again manifest the presence of the spirit of David, or Emmanuel, which in Hebrew literally means God or Yah is with. As pertains to our current discussion of the events prophesied to take place during the last days, we must explore another extremely significant and widely misunderstood term, the apocalypse. If we were to casually ask most people what their concept of the apocalypse is, most of their responses would immediately refer to the book of Revelation and refer to some form of cataclysmic or destructive events, possibly to include the destruction of the earth itself. While there are cataclysmic events connected with the events of the last days, these events should be seen as byproducts of the actual event spoken of by the prophets. Furthermore, this event does not include the physical destruction of the earth. The word revelation, from the late Latin revelatio, which means, as does the Greek apocalypsis, from which the English word apocalypse is derived, disclosure of that which was previously hidden or unknown. As we continue to build our case and properly interpret biblical symbolism via Hebrew thought, it naturally flows that since the apocalypse or resurrection actually references a form of knowledge, the day of the Lord references the observable manifestation of this form of knowledge, breaking forth and serving as the prophetic healing agent for the peoples of the earth. Even Christian theological institutions teach that the resurrection would bring forth salvation. Yet we must ask ourselves the question if the definition of salvation provided by these institutions is actually in alignment with the original intent of the prophets. Once again, we find that we must separate fact from fiction and the truth from the lie. The incredible hoax perpetrated by the anti-Yah civilization promotes the idea that all one has to do in order to claim that they are born again is just say that they are now saved. Aside from trying to lead an honest life, no other changes would be necessary. No consideration has ever been given to such significant activities as personal dietary habits or lifestyle. Thus, this would leave the person completely prone and powerless to maintain good health or to defend his or her life from the inevitable consequences of chronic and persistent abuse of the delicate balance required to sustain the systems of the body and sustain life.
Works like a slave to make ends meet. While the rich keep getting richer, the poor keep getting poor. Be the homeless ones living in the street. And with the time and all we care for one another. Everybody's doing his own thing. Got yours and I got mine. Love we had is gone cold. It's a cold world. Nobody really cares. Really cares. I said it's a cold world. Nobody won't
The historic election of United States President Barack Obama and the ensuing euphoria that followed has caused many writers to seize upon the concept of the Promised Land and imply that now America has to be that long-awaited Promised Land. Well, it definitely is, and it definitely is not. In the sense of the curses promised to a people moving contrary to the laws and instructions of Yah, America has definitely fulfilled those promises. However, the original concept of the Promised Land, as expressed by the prophets, meant something entirely different altogether. The constitutional compromise over slavery, which was reached in 1788, caused the writers of the Constitution to state that for voting purposes, all of the people who were currently classified as slaves would be counted as 3/5 of a human being. The Emancipation Proclamation, brought forth by U.S. President Abraham Lincoln, the so-called Great Emancipator, was an incredible hoax perpetrated upon the pages of history, which actually only freed slaves that were completely out of the jurisdiction of the United States of America. Because the America, the South had seceded from the Union and established a confederacy, it was now a sovereign nation. Therefore, the United States of America and the Union had absolutely no authority to pass or to enforce any type of legislation, including the Emancipation Proclamation. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 was a tremendous victory for the forces of the Civil Rights Movement and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. However, the Voting Rights Act is merely a piece of legislation which has a specified time period after which it must be once again signed by the United States President in order to go into effect. If the President deems it necessary not to sign this particular piece of legislation, it leads us to wonder what measures would have to be activated in order to protect the rights of those United States citizens that the Civil Rights Act was established in the first place to protect. The assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968 set off an entire wave of riots and violence across the United States. From coast to coast, urban centers of the United States went up in flames. This caused the U.S. President, Lyndon B. Johnson, to convene the National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders, or the Kerner Commission. The job of the Kerner Commission was to determine why the riots were continuing to happen in urban centers of America and to determine if there was any possibility of preventing them. The commission concluded that our nation is moving toward two societies, one black, one white, separate and unequal. 40 years later, on the anniversary of the Kerner Commission report of 1968, the dire predictions that were stated in the report were revisited to see if, in fact, they had come to pass. The findings of this 40-year anniversary investigation came to be known as the Millennium Breach. According to the Milton S. Eisenhower Foundation, a group founded to continue the work of the commission, the Kerner Commission's prophecy had come to pass. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, and minorities are suffering disproportionately. Their findings also went on to state that the top 1% of Americans have more wealth than the bottom 90%. The report said that the United States is first in the world among industrialized nations when it comes to wealth inequality. As we continue to evaluate the merits of the claim of America being the promised land, let us also direct our attention to Northeast Africa, Israel, and a small group of determined men and women who in 1967, according to biblical prophecy, stated that they were returning to their ancestral homeland. Although they arrived in 1967, their arrival was foretold by the watchers of time, centuries and millennia prior to their arrival. In the 17th century, Sir Isaac Newton, the culminating figure of the scientific
father-in-law.
At about the time of the end of the world, a body of men will be raised up at Jerusalem who will turn their attention to the prophecies and insist upon their literal interpretation in the midst of much clamor and opposition. 300.
Shalom, shalom. Yeah, I came to come visit my in-laws, you know what I mean, because they wanted to see the baby, so we here with them, visiting them. So I had to go in one of their rooms real quick. My father-in-law, he crazy boy. Hold on, y'all. Continue on. Hallelujah.
100 years later, famed German-born Jewish philosopher Oscar Goldberg stated, the coming of black people from America to the Holy Land would signify the beginning of the Messianic era. On July 28, 1994, the Congressional Human Rights Caucus of the U.S. House of Representatives staged a congressional briefing entitled A Miracle in the Desert, the African-American Presence in Israel. The Human Rights Caucus focused attention on the accomplishments of the community and stated that the African Hebrew Israelites of Jerusalem had become an integral part of the mosaic which is modern-day Israel. Their contributions in the areas of natural food production and organic agriculture, music, fashion design and manufacturing, holistic healthcare and education were featured not just as accomplishments of the community, but accomplishments for the state of Israel as well. Regional Israeli newspaper Yediot Ahronot presented an article entitled "The Hebrew Israelite Community is in the Best of Health." The article focused attention on the superb health of the community, as well as the interest of the Israeli Foreign Ministry to promote the community as a model to the world of healthy living, as well as a community devoid of modern-day diseases. On September 29, 2006, the official website of the Israel Ministry of Foreign Affairs posted an informational site on the Hebrew Israelite community describing it as a phenomenon in a land full of phenomena. As we consider the balance of all this information that we have presented as to the experiences of Africans in America prior to 1967,
he just gave me this important wine. So I'm about to taste it, y'all. I'm about to taste it. But let me go back a little bit because I heard something about Oscar Goldberg right before I left file. So let me go back a little bit. Forgive me, y'all, because I want to expound on some things. So I'm just going to go back just a little bit. Okay. Oh, man. What did I miss? Shoot. I'm going back, y'all. Because I have to say some things. Okay, I passed all that. I remember that. Okay. Yep, I remember all that. Yep. So start there. All right.
Millennia prior to their arrival.
Oh, prior to their
In the 17th
arrival.
century, prophecy stated that they will reach East Africa.
Got you.
The report said
okay.
that the
Let me
United
start it here.
States first
Because it's important that I break this down so I give y'all the kingdom understanding of how we define this stuff.
As we continue to evaluate the merits of the claim of America being the promised land, let us also direct our attention to Northeast Africa, Israel, and a small group of determined men and women who in 1967, according to biblical prophecy, stated that they were returning to their ancestral homeland. Although they arrived in 1967, their arrival was foretold by the watchers of time, centuries and even millennia prior to their arrival. In the 17th century, Sir Isaac Newton, the culminating figure of the scientific revolution, stated, "At about the time of the end of the world, a body of men will be raised up at Jerusalem who will turn their attention to the prophecies and insist upon their literal interpretation in the midst of much clamor and opposition."
Stop. So you got to understand when you read Daniel 2:44, it talks about the kingdom is going to come during the time as these kingdoms are still going to be reigning. And look what Isaac Newton's saying. He said that it's going to be calamity when these people are going to be rising in the east in Jerusalem. That's going to insist on a literal interpretation of the scripture, meaning coming from out of this captivity. Watch what Isaac Goldberg say, which was, he was a so-called, or he was a German, a Jewish philosopher. And listen to what he say, and his understudy, Harry Dorfield, came to us and expressed, hold on. Yes. I let y'all continue this. Hold on.
300 years later, famed German-born Jewish philosopher Oscar Goldberg stated, "The coming of black people from America to the Holy Land would signify the beginning of the Messianic era." On July 28, 1994, the Congressional Human Rights Caucus of the U.S. House of Representatives staged a congressional briefing entitled "A Miracle in the Desert: The African American Presence in Israel." The Human Rights Caucus focused attention on the accomplishments of the community and stated that the African Hebrew Israelites of Jerusalem had become an integral part of the mosaic which is modern-day Israel. Their contributions in the areas of natural food production and organic agriculture, music, fashion design and manufacturing, holistic healthcare and education were featured not just as accomplishments of the community, but accomplishments for the state of Israel as well. Regional Israeli newspaper Yediot Ahronot presented an article entitled "The Hebrew Israelite Community is in the Best of Health." The article focused attention on the superb health of the community, as well as the interest of the Israeli Foreign Ministry to promote the community as a model to the world of healthy living, as well as a community devoid of modern-day diseases. On September 29, 2006, the official website of the Israel Ministry of Foreign Affairs posted an informational site on the Hebrew Israelite community describing it as a phenomenon in a land full of phenomena. As we consider the balance of all of this information that we have presented as to the experiences of Africans in America prior to 1967 and the overwhelming accomplishments of the Hebrew Israelite community in Israel since 1967, we place the question before intelligent, rational thinking people: where do you believe the promised land is? 40 years. 40 since Ben-Ami received the vision to return to the Holy Land and establish the prophesied kingdom of Yah on earth. At this point, it is significant to recall the fourfold mission of the Israelites presented earlier as evidence, because it would not have been enough for the Israelites to successfully complete a back to Africa expedition. On the contrary, theirs had to be a successful return to the laws and instructions of Yah Yahawashi, the creator of the heavens and earth. As testimony of these events, we reference the words of Ben-Ami during the 40th year celebrations. 40 years have passed since the sacred visit by the angel Gabriel. In that span of time, we have not achieved all the things that were promised, but what we have accomplished is definitely no less than a miracle. For we in our blessed generation have reestablished ourselves firmly and permanently in our homeland. We have returned from the last prophetic captivity, never to have such an experience again. In addition, we are the generation which has given birth to the first children of the Most High to be born free since the destruction of the temple. That alone should provide sufficient motivation to carry us to eternity. Not only do we possess the minds chosen to nurture the Genesis ideal, but we have also become a beacon of light unto all of the suffering families on this earth. For the words spoken by the prophet, "In thy seed shall all the families of the earth be blessed," verily are being fulfilled in this blessed generation. As we present our closing remarks and close our case on the great international religious conspiracy, 400 years of slavery, the Exodus, and the establishment of the long-awaited kingdom of Yah on earth, we offer a prophetic timeline of events to refresh our memory and support the truth of our case. The year 70 ACE, Israel ultimately dispersed from the land, and Jerusalem devastated by the Roman general Titus. The 16th century represents a point of reference for the activation of the profoundly effective snare called the good ship Jesus. Few may connect this term with slave ships bearing that name, such as the Spanish slave ship of Sir John Hawkins called the Jesus of Lubeck. Even fewer will ever relate that the African prisoners of war, known by the misnomer of slaves, desire to see Jesus was really a soul cry that they wanted to board these ships and go back home to Africa, not into the clouds to meet a European savior. 1863. Once again referencing the Emancipation Proclamation. This is the false or erroneous date many would offer as the ending of chattel slavery in America. In fact, the Emancipation Proclamation merely transferred the African prisoners of war from private ownership and jurisdiction to federal jurisdiction. To this day, true freedom has yet to be realized by those still languishing in America under the prophecies of Deuteronomy 28. 1963, 100 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivers his historic I Have a Dream speech during the March on Washington. It was during this same season that His Excellency Ben-Ami and his colleagues began to ask questions at the Abeda Cultural Center regarding the fate of African Americans and their ultimate destiny. As a result of the questions asked in 1963 and the answers that were provided, in 1966 Ben-Ami receives the 45-second vision that it is time for the Israelites to return to their ancestral homeland. 1967, the Exodus. More than 300 souls leave America to prepare themselves to contend with the Creator face to face in the jungles of Liberia. March 1968. Dr. King delivers his I've Been to the Mountaintop speech. Within approximately 1 month of Dr. King's mountaintop speech, the African Hebrew Israelites returned to their ancestral homeland, represented by Prince Keskiahu and His Excellency Ben-Ami, to scout the land and prepare for the great ingathering and the establishment of the long-awaited kingdom of Yah on earth. February 2005. The inauguration of the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Southern Christian Leadership Conference Ben-Ami Institute for a New Humanity. As with many tales spun over the pages of time, this presentation ends right back where it began. In fact, it ends where everything began. Eden, Northeast Africa. You now have before you all of the evidence. Could people of African descent truly be the descendants of the Israelites and the people of the book? Could it really be true that the kingdom of heaven is here on earth and expanding as we speak? Have the prophecies pertaining to the regathering of the ancient Israelites really been fulfilled by the African Hebrew Israelites of Jerusalem? You now have a profound choice to make. Believe it or not.
That is, they are not founded upon any particular religion, but rather from a definite. The Restoration Village, the restoration of heaven on earth through the revitalization of the African village concept. The concepts of the restoration of the African village are born out of an African godly perspective. That is, they are not founded upon any particular religion, but rather from a definite set of principles, spiritual principles that are in harmony with God. These principles become the building blocks of life and the keys for the maintenance of the planet for the benefit of all living beings. I pray that they can form the starting point for a new beginning for Africa and our people by providing the inspiration for thinking in that direction. We should not see Africa as being underdeveloped, but as being miraculously preserved by God to become the center for producing sound leadership of the human family, providing the light for a new ecologically sound social order. Therefore, we are compelled to not only raise questions about the failed direction of the past, but also to chart the course for confronting the problems of today and inspire a new direction for the future. It has been my experience that the key to our success is in assuring that our objectives and the means for obtaining them reflect a commitment to remain in harmony with the laws of God. That means that our efforts are designed to prolong, maintain, and sustain the well-being of righteous man and the earth.
We are listening
Considering
to
the
Ben Ami,
magnitude
Rest in
and the comprehensive nature of the deception that has brought us to this point, we are well aware that to change is no minor undertaking. But we are not discouraged. But we understand that except men inspired of God accept the challenge of forming a new world in harmony with God, life and living, it simply will not be. The decisions that confront us are, in most cases, not easy ones. They are the decisions that will determine if our future generations will have a place on the planet Earth. The planet, as evidenced by the unprecedented occurrences of earthquakes, floods, hurricanes, and other phenomena, has utterly rejected contemporary man's position. Actually, the great majority of ecological crises threatening the continent and the globe stem from the same underlying cause, the undisciplined Euro-American contemporary society, which is guilty of polluting and wantonly destroying the Earth's ecosystems. The industrialized society of the Northern Hemisphere are using, by some estimates, more than 90% of the Earth's natural resources.
Ben Ami was a monster, man. Woo-hoo. The Rabbi wasn't no joke. I'm so glad that I was able to be his understudier, man. One of his understudiers. You know what I mean? He had a lot of understudiers, you know. And I was an understudy of Shah Eliashib Ben Yahuda as well. Minister of Information of the Kingdom of Yah and Demonic Israel. It's just an honor, man, and a privilege to been, under his foot. You know what I'm saying? It's deep, man. And I just miss him, man. May he rest in completeness. Shalom to our international ambassador and Prime Minister, Prince Asiel Ben Yisrael. Hallelujah.
This relatively recent and dramatic change in mankind's relationship to Earth, dating back no more than 500 years, has led to the collision between industrial civilization and the ecological systems of the planet. Consider the following statement made by environmental scientist Samir Abu El-Hajj of the Center for Environmental and Occupational Health Science at the Bir Zayed University in Israel. He makes the following comments. Today in the Jordan Valley, the excessive use of pesticides have tremendously increased production costs to the point where the crops can no longer be grown and marketed profitably. Herbicide residues in the soil might be at such very high levels that crops cannot even be successfully grown in the future. We that are in fact striving to save our most precious earth must not perceive the condition of the earth as being separate from the state of mind that is governing it. Remember, everything begins with a thought. Only afterwards is substance manifested. Since we agree that man's mind poses the primary threat to all life, including his own, we must also indict the institutions that train, for in the final analysis, men are simply doing what they have been taught. It is essential that we understand that a demented mind has created an entire value system which emphasizes personal wealth above national sanity. Wherefore, if we are to succeed in this epic struggle to save the earth, the individualistic ambitions of the overdeveloped nations to attain more wealth must be resisted and subordinated for the benefit of the whole. The truth is, blessings or curses are each the fruit, the results of the works of those upon whom they fall. Thereby, in the final analysis, man either blesses or curses himself. The whole to which we refer is the whole human family, whose quality of life is being adversely affected by incorrect decisions made by the developed nations. The majority of the world's populace are victims by chance, not choice. Lands of the majority have become the dumping grounds of the minority. For example, industrialized nations are unable to dispose of the massive amounts of waste they are generating and are shipping this often toxic debris to lesser developed countries. However, the non-compromising law of relativity reminds us of the resilient nature of the earth. To continuously destroy the balance of the ecosystem while simultaneously subjugating nature for the sake of profit or material greed leads all of mankind down the path of self-destruction. Because nature's ultimate resilience has but one recourse, and that is to preserve itself. We now must put forth a new plan that can find acceptance among all of the ecosystems upon which our lives depend for survival. Our power cannot be manifested by trying to change the fundamental natural laws that govern us, but by developing a high level of consciousness of their existence and how to function in harmony with them. Otherwise, our continued violation of these natural laws will inevitably lead to more and more natural disasters. Our power will come through a spiritual rejuvenation, not an industrial or technological revolution. My faith in you is evidenced by my attempt to quicken your acceptance of reality, causing you to spring forth into full and perfect life. All things flow from Yah, the Almighty, creator of all things. In the Genesis, the first beings were created in his image and likeness in a land called Eden, paradise. Adam, the all-kind, represented the completion of creation, initiating what I refer to as the Adamic civilization. Prophetically, Africa, or better yet, Eden, and her people are now the focus for the fate of the world. As it is written, the first shall be last, and the last shall be first. I define this to convey that the people first created in the image and likeness of the Most Holy, charged to carry out his divine will and maintain divine order on earth, have now become the last in a chaotic, evil world, and are now being called forth to lead the restoration of heaven on earth. The work to be done now in Eden, Africa, must build on revived African traditional values, lifestyles, and cultural patterns inherited as the Genesis ideal of a harmonious life with the Creator. That simply means the restoration of proper relationships between people, the forces of nature, and the spirit that conveys the Genesis idea, all of which will be cultivated in the restoration villages to reflect values arising out of a sincere desire to be one with the Creator. In such villages, morality, decency, and proper conduct are promoted by an extended network of Yah-fearing men and women. All wealth generated within the village will be communally shared according to agreed upon guidelines. Healthy desires for pleasure and inspirational public performance will provide the basis for life-supporting creativity,
so that we may be in glory as the holy.
It's my song right
here. Instead of the insidious, frivolous, and destructive entertainment which now has the world out of balance. Our objective is for the village to be self-sustaining, utilizing the crafts and skills of the residents to create industry. Sustainable organic agriculture will be a major component of village industry, providing both food and fuel. All of the village's human, animal, and plant waste will be composted into organic matter for recycling back into the soil to promote and maintain its fertility. When considering the question of economic development and investment, we must be very selective of the types of products we desire to manufacture and make abundantly available to the populace. For essential industry, let us consider the areas of food, shelter, clothing, and institutions. Where food is concerned, we can easily supply our population with fresh fruit, vegetables, legumes, and whole grain throughout the year. In this area, the essential industries would include the milling of our grains, husking of our rice, etc. Reasonable mechanization would be required for the cleaning, sorting, and packaging of produce for shipping. And perhaps the canning or jarring of the few items not available throughout the year, but for which it has been determined that they are desired or required during the off-season. It should be the same in our building and clothing industries. We should seek to establish industry to complement and supply products wherefrom we become locally self-sufficient. The concern is that during the initial stages of development, we not steer far away from vertically integrated economic development, such as projects in which the success depends on no outside sources, just the mobility and energy of those the project seeks to serve. The village's health care will be promoted by their understanding of life management, or is what we will refer to as health literacy, life management principles, and reinforced by low-stress living, contentment, life-giving foods, and yaw-centered spirituality. Each village's healthcare center will bring medical services and information closer to the rural population, saving lives and alleviating suffering, the impact of which will be most immediately realized through facilitating simpler access to the village's birthing facility, which will mitigate or reduce to a minimum the problems that result from prenatal or childbirth-related causes. In addition, utilizing well-developed indigenous knowledge and truth science, harmonized with the Creator, will end all unnecessary suffering resulting from alien-imposed knowledge, worldviews, and clever but life-threatening technology. We realize that many of the things being promoted by the Western world sound progressive and beneficial. Nevertheless, they are designed strictly for the purpose of more tightly integrating the people of Africa into their world economy and monetary system, and subsequently under their material control. The purpose is to bring about a greater dependence of thinking processes, systems, and technologies that are controlled by those in opposition to divine order. Inherent in the design of modern society are mechanisms that facilitate the process of dominion, domination, and control, strictly for advancing the objectives of the oppressors. Contemporary Western education only prepares you to be put into service on their behalf. The understanding gained by logical thinking using the yaw mind makes evident the intrinsic character of the prevalent ungodly cultural offspring born of an alien conceptualization of the earth. This conceptualization alienates us from the Genesis idea, or the yaw mind. Little effort is required to see the obvious results of a deceptive progress. The modern way of life has been disastrous for the people and the earth itself. Possibly, we may conclude that it is really a blessing that Africa has not been heavily contaminated with this mindset. When it is so obvious, why have we not concluded that planting the seeds of Western society will only grow to manifest the same kinds of patterns of discord and strife? Truthfully, the economic policies of the so-called advanced nations and corporations of today are failing to serve the essential needs of society for human dignity and oneness with God. For the developing African nation that is earnestly seeking a better way, none of the existing models can help. In testimony to this legacy of failure, the following excerpt from Newsweek sheds light on the World Bank's dismal record of failure in Africa.
Nowhere is better judgment needed than in Africa, the only region in an increasingly privatized world where the bank still commands a central financing and policy role. After a decade of following World Bank advice, living standards in Africa have fallen by 2% annually. Unemployment has quadrupled to 100 million, and real wages have plunged by a third. Across Africa, projects funded by the World Bank have become synonymous with financial mismanagement, environmental degradation, displacement of vulnerable populations, and corruption. "50 years after the bank began lending out a total of $350 billion for some 6,000 projects, it is finally raising the question of whether such projects work."
The pursuit of money and materialism have become so important that social, environmental, and spiritual consequences no longer seem to matter. Gone is the concern for collective well-being. And while they are loath to admit it, the advanced industrial nations begrudgingly have to face their inability to stop the decline. Perhaps Norman Lear, noted American writer and television producer, said it best in a 1993 article entitled Tender Truth, when he wrote, "The truth is that living by the numbers is not a happy way to live one's life." Let's face it, America is not a nation enjoying its material success. And it should be obvious by now that a higher GNP, a faster computer chip, and interactive televisions with 500 channels are not going to address the hole in America's heart, a direct result of the spiritual poverty of our time, end quote. Vanishing jobs and the fear of unemployment have transformed workers in industrialized nations into virtual slaves to a constantly shifting job market. They are working harder, performing even more tasks, and consequently are more anxious and less satisfied with their lives overall. Before you get the impression that I am totally opposed to the use of any technology, let me state that that is not the case. The concern I am expressing is that the pursuit of money and materialism has produced a distorted thinking process in man, with no regard for the obvious natural laws of limitations. There are limits that men cannot ignore and remain in harmony with the life cycles of Almighty God. Initially, technology was to be a great savings, giving us more and costing us less. We must now consider the end result of applied technology and what it truthfully has cost us. What we have paid with our ecosystems and the value lost on our human resources. The countries pushing high tech have made abundant human resources the Earth's major problem. Subsequently, they are looking for solutions to overpopulation instead of overdevelopment. Obviously, I view the problem as being too many machines performing jobs, or better stated, taking the jobs once done by people. What benefit is it to develop a social system that employs unlimited machinery and leaves people idle and homeless? Who would downgrade the value and need for a people in such a way? And why would they? Are we being snared in a mindset of development suicide that compels us to see the great human resources as a disposable burden? Enlightened governments must now demonstrate bold leadership and seize the power to define the role of business under its authority. Governments must accept the responsibility to emphasize to the individual by way of education and the corporation by way of standards of accountability that employment and business are functions of national service and exist not just for their personal gain. Every undertaking must be measured according to this principle. Again, we're not ignoring the income-earning functions of business and labor. These are pragmatic considerations as well, which have not been lacking as men have been doing business and making money for centuries. Yet, they have not included in their quarterly reports or State of the Union reviews the kind of spiritual evaluation that will make sacred the workplace, align the corporation, and protect the mere statement demonstrates that men clearly see the problem, but are unable to avoid it. They are trapped, and I repeat, they are trapped in a world of competition, and it is beyond their ability to free themselves. Governments not only have the right, but also the responsibility to question the positive or negative impact of an enterprise. If this responsibility had been exercised in the past, would we have businesses such as the tobacco industry? With government permission and subsidy, this evil industry manufactures and markets a product responsible for the death of 425,000 Americans and millions of others worldwide annually. Make no mistake, the earth cannot stand for China, India, South America, and Africa to become replicas of America and Europe. There would be no clean air, water, or land left anywhere, nor mineral resources. All of humanity and all of the ecosystems would be overwhelmed by waste. Much is being written about this crisis. Achieve the objectives we are striving for, the principles, rhythms, vibrations, and cycles, set times of divine order must guide everything we do. Remember, the ends are not separate from the means. The process we use to accomplish something will characterize the result. We must encourage the restoration of faith to believe that another direction for science, a less destructive kind of technology, a fair system of labor and management, and a truly progressive development can be rediscovered, rekindled, and applied. We must believe that a different kind of social order and lifestyle can be developed, which is effective, comfortable, and satisfying. Science and technology, realigned with truth, will become much more elaborate and interesting in our pursuit of life. But its intrinsic nature will remain interconnected with the divine order of the creation, and subsequently far less prone to being exploited and put into the service of the forces of chaos, discord, and individualism. We acknowledge and verify that there is a divine order for man and the universe, which was initially breathed into Adam as his breath of life. In the Adamic African worldview, truth, science, and spirituality are unified in a system of knowledge that provides guidance for the Adamic civilization, how to protect, balance, enhance, and move in harmony with the earth's beauty. The objective of evil is to, in some way, convince you not to subordinate yourself to that order, and even that there are no consequences for failure to do so. The objective of our effort is to build modern communal villages throughout the interior that will serve as both model and training grounds for all men and women designed to restore heaven on earth. I call it getting to heaven alive. Our indigenous local African family will provide the human resource, joined by those in the diaspora who are committed to the fulfillment of a similar vision for the restoration of the Adamic civilization. Africans of the diaspora would greatly benefit from the village during visits, vacations, and apprenticeships. being assisted in the casting off of the binding, blinding Western mentality and acclimatizing themselves to righteous living. Thereafter, they could join the village or proceed to build new ones. The truth is that in any African country where there is relative peace, I have found more genuine happiness than I have found among Africans vainly trying to fit into the cities of America and Europe. Among our brothers and sisters living in the diaspora, there is persistent anxiety and stress fueled by racism, socio-economic inequality, and the nagging desire for more material wealth. On the contrary, life in our own land is made sacred by our family values and willingness to share. Continental Africans would also visit, vacation, and apprentice at these villages to learn skills and access bountiful internal resources that will facilitate their going back to their own villages and transforming them into vital, life-promoting places. Soon, if not already, providing atmospheres conducive to clear and creative thinking will become the most sought-after service industry on the planet. More and more people are in search of and in need of a break from the trauma of trying to survive in an anti-life environment. I am speaking of much more than a resort or retreat in the traditional sense. It is recommended that we build an ecologically compatible spiritual advance. Note, not retreat, spiritual advance, where people may come to rest and think. A 7-star environment instead of a 5-star hotel. Those in control of this world need time to rethink the present trends and the policies responsible for them. They need a break from themselves. Africa should develop and promote spiritual advances where no animals or animal byproducts are served. There will be no stealing, no prostitutes or immodest dress, no negative television, lewd video, vulgar music, or provocative dancing.
Properly developed, we can make the African Edenic environment the most desirable in the world.
These advances would be spiritual sanctuaries, providing respite for peace of mind, body, and soul. Tenants would be invited to participate in the planting and or harvesting of foods as a natural experience of the presence and power of God.
There will be communal dining at least once a day and helpful recreation to reacquaint residents with the joy and energy that come from interacting with people of like mind. No alcoholic beverages other than naturally fermented wine will be available.
In addition to comfortable accommodation, these beautiful, serene rooms will inspire prayer and meditation. Let us show the beauty of what we have as men return to the cradle of civilization for inspiration to return to the Genesis idea as we share with them a new beginning.
A major social goal is to assist African nations and governments which are faced with the real population problem, a massive and overwhelming migration from the villages and the countrysides to the overcrowded slums of the cities.
Usually, the youth leave the countryside for two reasons. One is that they cannot make a living, which will allow them to attain many essentials. Another reason is their susceptibility to the attractions, deceptive attractions I may add, of a Western lifestyle proliferating in the cities. Hence, undertaking a program of stabilizing the hemorrhaging from the villages while simultaneously restoring their health and vitality is of utmost importance for African governments. Problems of burgeoning cities are not unlikely to be solved in the near future. Therefore, the prudent course of action is to address the problem at its source. Successful village development will ease the burden on African governments by providing an organic agricultural extension which will greatly enhance the nutritive food intake of their people while also providing the villagers with livelihoods. The restoration of morality by reviving traditional values while providing engaging life-generating activities will greatly assist African governments in their ultimate objective of reviving African glory. The African Restoration Village becomes an associate institution being promoted as a living and learning center. It does not follow the Western model of individualism. The Restoration Village will consist of, but not be limited to, the teaching of specific professions and arts such as sustainable agriculture, preventive health care, metalworking, weaving, furniture making, soil product manufacturing, ceramics, and basket making. All such professions will be rooted in an understanding of the spirit of nature and its natural ecology. In effect, it will constitute dedicating the individual to the eternal life cycles of the Creator. We are to be successful in our efforts to restore balance to humanity and the planet. We must institutionalize our struggle. Doing so demonstrates a high level of seriousness, tenacity, and vision. In the future, it is recommended that we establish a small accredited ecology and nature E&M institute or university for an enrollment of 60 to 90 students. This institution will teach the required university courses, yet it will specialize in ecology and nature courses as the major for all enrolled students, causing the students to become more sensitive to their physical and spiritual needs and their relationship to the environment. We prefer to have a small, highly sought-after institution in the initial stage for minimizing management, monitoring, and budgetary concerns. Since ecology and nature comprise such a vast arena, the graduate students are certain to be multifaceted masters of several disciplines. This institution will inspire governments to create jobs for its graduates. The jobs for E&N graduates will aid in creating a human shield around the country's ecosystem that will by far supersede the value of salaries. In addition, their presence will stimulate further and continuous dialogue on the subject, which shall broaden the national consciousness and interest. Thereafter, as additional individuals, entities, and countries acquire an increased level of E&N interest and understanding, they too will enlist in the struggle. More than likely, they will be inspired to contribute and or experiment with similar ideas. This could project Africa into the forefront of the struggle to save Mother Earth. This new sense of pride could become the catalyst to foster homegrown solutions to many other problems besetting the continent. Understandably, one of the biggest impediments to the sons and daughters of Africa ushering in the new age, heaven on earth, is the necessity under current influences to obtain income in some form of currency in order to provide many basic necessities. Initially, to some extent, it may be necessary to operate with the global monetary system to accomplish many important tasks. Key to our success would be our resistance to the trend toward the deification of money and materialism. Nevertheless, the village will strive for self-sufficiency and independence from the global market economy. Fundamentally, this will prevent being in the position of serving the global market economy rather than focusing more towards serving our internal needs. This is a necessity because its record clearly demonstrates that the global market economy is not designed to serve the needs of the masses. European colonizers and more recently the development partners have long-range, far-reaching plans. What they deem as being in Europe's best interests are simply not in Africa's best interests. The plan of European powers historically
is to develop conditions favorable for the continued exploitation and economic dependency of Africa. Subsequently, economic policies are formulated elsewhere and dumped on African countries, a process that they have no control over. This is why all of their development plans for Africa, even these nice-sounding progressive ones, must be carefully scrutinized. Though some may believe they are introducing modern development in medical care for humanitarian reasons, the end result is all too often the exploitation of a laboring population of Africans, a population increasingly divorced from their cultural practices and thus their sense of themselves serving European interests. Overt exploitation is thusly concealed behind rhetoric and mechanisms that are increasingly more subtle and difficult to identify. These policies ostensibly promote economic development, but the primary objective is the development of African people in a manner contrary to their natures via the imposition of a culture that will completely destroy the African image. They give us the economic incentive to encourage our partnership in the destruction of African consciousness society. The Restoration Village is not what is commonly recommended for or thought of as African development, for the primary reasons of being focused on the rural areas and creator-centered. In the early stages of developing the Restoration Village, the government or local authorities should grant the use of the land without rent and with reasonable assurances of indefinite tenure. In exchange, the land would be made productive and the people of the surrounding areas would draw on it as a resource for learning how to transform their villages and lands into productive, self-sufficient societies. These living and learning centers would show by example how to live successfully without massive expenditures which are usually beyond the means of overburdened national budgets. Everyone who comes to learn at the Restoration Villages will return to where they live and strive to replicate the whole model. Or they may only take back with them certain skills and aspects that could help them in their current context. In addition, the Restoration Village will be a major benefit for farming techniques and basic agri-technology skills that will boost food production and human resource productivity of the community and the nation in ways coinciding with the objectives of African governments. The objective of the Restoration Village vision is to make a success out of what we Africans have and control. Africa's greatest wealth is its human resources. We must protect them, develop them, and structure production to reflect their needs. Proper planning and excessive income over consumption expenditures will result from growing our own food, making our own clothing, and providing other necessities of daily life directly with our labors. Income will also be generated by marketing produce and products and the establishment of service industries and apprenticeships. Africa has the largest concentration of people not directly in contact with or directly affected by the ravages of modern science and Western technology. Upward of 90% of Africa's population south of the Sahara have had very little contact with modernity beyond the automobile and recently the cell phone. In areas such as these, our people will recognize, appreciate, and respond to the advancement brought about through simplicity and modesty. Villages will build physical strength as nutrition improves and moral strength to effectively challenge and overcome lust and greed. Key components of the village restoration plan are: 1. To
promote research and development of the underutilized reservoir of indigenous knowledge, systems, science, and technologies, methods for the restoration of sustainable and viable African communities. Indigenous Pharmacological Science, IPS. IPS will provide the basis for sustainable development and expansion of natural plant-based preparations for treatment and eradication of sickness and disease. In addition, IPS will be instrumental in synthesizing herbal plant nutritional supplements. Indigenous agri-systems will be instrumental in reintroducing a variety of highly nutritional, ecological, adoptable, and high-yielding indigenous food crops. These food crops could play a key role in ameliorating the problem of hunger, malnutrition, and food security. Indigenous nutritional science should be developed and expanded in conjunction with indigenous agri-systems. The interfacing of these two systems will result in the creation of food products and beverages of exceptional nutritional value. These products will aid in the correction and prevention of nutritional deficiencies prevalent in many African countries. 2. To function as research centers and seed repositories. Seeds will be saved, replanted, and developed. In addition, the villages are to serve as living laboratories to rediscover, test, and develop native and ancient species and varieties of food, fiber, and healing crops, and thereafter teach how they can best be reintroduced into the current context. Growing native species of crops is extremely important for maintaining biodiversity, which benefits the soil, natural ecology, and agricultural productivity. Native crops are diverse, strong, drought-resistant, have medicinal uses, and carry with them a wealth of knowledge. To research indigenous African botanical science and develop biophyto-derived formulations from indigenous African flora. These preparations will be used to control, prevent crop diseases and pests. There are an abundance of tree plants, neem, papaya, that when properly formulated are highly effective controls for use in agriculture. 4. To expand water harvesting, purification, and sanitation methods. The accessibility of clean and adequate water resources is key to productive, health, and sustainable African communities. Therefore, we must devise practical ways and means to develop water collection and water storage systems. Simple collection systems for harvesting rainwater, home storage water systems, underground village storage tanks, and manually constructed catchment ponds are encouraging examples of what can be constructed using locally available resources. Purification and sanitizing of water can be accomplished by using biophytocoagulants and disinfectants. Specific indigenous plants, trees, have properties which remove impurities of water and sanitize, disinfect drinking supplies. The seeds of the African moringa tree is a noted example. Therefore, we will draw focused attention on researching and developing this area. Consider the book of Exodus, the 15th chapter, verses 22 through 25.
So Moses brought Israel from the Red Sea, and they went out into the wilderness of Shur. And they went 3 days in the wilderness, and found no water. And when they came to Marah, they could not drink of the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore the name of it was called Marah. And the people murmured against Moses, saying, what shall we drink? And he cried unto the Lord, and the Lord shewed him a tree, which when he had cast into the waters were made sweet. There he made for them a statute and an ordinance, and there he proved them.
Solar water disinfection, slow sand and gravel filtration are additional means to purify and disinfect water for potable use. 5. Promote soil fertility via the utilization of ancient practices. Since man is formed from the dust of the earth, the soil will be of significant importance. The wisdom of the Bible reminds us that the land must lie fallow every 7th year to preserve its strength.
And the Lord spake unto Moses in Mount Sinai, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, When ye come into the land which I give you, then shall the land keep a Sabbath unto the Lord. 6 years thou shalt sow thy field, and 6 years thou shalt prune thy vineyard, and gather in the fruit thereof. But in the 7th year shall be a Sabbath of rest unto the land, a Sabbath for the Lord. Thou shalt neither sow thy field, nor prune thy vineyard.
This practice obviously influences life, living, and good health. Subsequently, it is of critical importance how we feed and treat the soil during the 6 years of use. A key component of maintaining the health of the soil during the years that it is being worked is returning to it the nutrients that it yields and which subsequently pass through our bodies. These must ultimately be returned to the soil in the form of compost, along with other organic matter. 6. Function around divine order and an Afrocentric value system. We will utilize truth-centered science and indigenous knowledge systems. Also, other technologies and methods that are compatible with the objective. The villages will become known as living and learning centers that pursue holistic research and utilize methods of teaching integrated with daily life, an antithesis of chaos, discord, disharmony. Instead of individualism, there will be a natural social ecology. One of the major objectives is to halt the advance of sickness and death in the country, and thereafter provide life for the entire continent. 7. To integrate tree husbandry for food and field is a key component of the village restoration plan. Again, I go to the Bible, the book of Deuteronomy, the 20th chapter, and the 19th verse.
When thou shalt besiege a city a long time, in making war against it to take it, thou shalt not destroy the trees thereof by forcing an axe against them, for thou mayest eat of them, and thou shalt not cut them down, for the tree of the field is man's life, to employ them in the siege.
We may discern from this verse that the tree, complemented by the field crops, herbs of the field, was intended to be the primary source of man's food. Man has long forgotten that the tree is the staff of life, not wheat. It was the fall of man from the Genesis ideal that caused him to resort to animal husbandry. Prior to his fall, human life was primarily sustained by the tree. Thus, it is not coincidental that a major focus and thrust of our ecological struggle concerns trees. Our struggle for the trees is our struggle for the life of man on the planet. Just as the tree was an integral part of the former Genesis, so must it be in our new ecological genesis. Foods grown on trees provide protein, essential amino acids, milk for children and adults, and all other vitamins and minerals required to maintain a perfectly healthy body and mind. In addition to that, they increase the oxygen content of the air, reduce greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, draw the rain, and prevent soil erosion, while requiring less fertilizer, if at all, and minimal care. In addition, trees will yield their produce for generations. Therefore, we should strengthen existing tree husbandry by planting 1,000 acres of various selected trees for food and fuel. To coincide with this planting, we should sponsor a comprehensive course on trees, the staff of life. This will have many benefits and positive ramifications that shall positively enhance the ecological process. For instance, it can eventually change the status of animal husbandry, which consumes the majority of the grains grown and water used. We also note that the leaves of the tree are to be used for medicine. Medicine for the air, for the soil, and for man.
And by the river upon its bank, on this side and on that side, shall grow all trees for
always be determined by the degree of his or its harmony with the forces and laws of nature. The fullness of life depends upon a harmonious relationship with the natural laws. You must feel your kinship with the earth and once again move to protect it from abuse. You must develop a sense of oneness with your environment and realize your dependence upon it. Thereafter, your growing respect for the earth will prevent and check further its destruction. 7.
To the Yah phenomenon, I'd like to go in and read something to you. Truth science. Truth science. To Yehoshua, Ha until we came of age to understand that we had to take our prophetic mandate. So the adrenaline is flowing. I would be remiss if I didn't give all praise and honor to the elders who are sitting in the congregation, as I told others, those that are not here, wherever they might be found, in whatever form. Let us give all praise and honor to the fact that they have held up the mantle and have persevered, suffered, stay diligent, until we came of age to understand that we had to take our prophetic mandate and continue the resurrection and restoration of QANATH and the Edification. All time, Abba Yaakov, Nasi Abba Yaakov. Hallelujah! Great day in the kingdom. Especially a great day to be in the kingdom in these times. I'm very inspired and motivated by the presentations from the Holy Jerusalem Writers Conference this year. And went home last night, couldn't sleep behind a man of valor, Ishmael, and through Avram and through Yehoshua, F.O.P.E. So I went into deep meditation to see what I can come up with. Follow behind that. I was giving a theme, and I'll try to stick to it, 25 words or less. So would someone please, I was given 40 minutes, I need to have the 20-minute mark, and I would like to have Corinne to come up for a minute, please. Restoring the idea of science to the Yah phenomenon. Is that correct? Restoring the idea of science to the Yah phenomenon. I'd like to Corinne to read something, please.
Truth science.
Truth science.
We must teach botany.
We must teach botany.
Biology.
Biology.
Chemistry.
Chemistry.
Physics.
Physics.
And other sciences.
And other sciences.
Systems of knowledge.
Which are systems of knowledge.
In a manner that is congruent.
With
the word of Yah.
With the word of Yah.
The relative laws that govern all aspects of life.
We must teach these sciences in a manner that is what?
Congruent.
Congruent.
With the word of Yah.
Otherwise, read.
The relative laws that govern all aspects of life.
These sciences must